Squidward's suicide. I just want to start off by saying, if you want an answer at the end, prepare to be disappointed. There just isn't one. I was an intern at Nickelodeon Studios for a year in 2005 for my degree in animation. It wasn't paid, of course. Most internships aren't, but it did have some perks beyond education. To adults, it might not seem like a big one, but most kids at the time would go crazy over it. Now, since I worked directly with the editors and animators, I got to view the new episodes days before they even aired. I'll get right to it without giving many unnecessary details. They had very recently made the SpongeBob movie, and the entire staff was somewhat sapped of creativity, so it took them longer to start up the season. But the delay lasted longer for more upsetting reasons. There was a problem with the Series 4 premiere that set everyone and everything back for several months. Me and 2 other interns were in the editing room, along with the lead animators and sound editors for the final cut. We received the copy that was supposed to be Fear of a Krabby Patty and gathered around the screen to watch. Now, given that it isn't final yet, animators often put a mock title card, sort of an inside joke for us, with phony, oftentimes lewd titles, such as How Sex Doesn't Work, instead of Rockabye by Valve, when SpongeBob and Patrick adopt a sea scallop. Nothing particularly funny, but work-related chuckles. So, with this being a normal thing, when we saw the title card, Squidward's Suicide, we didn't think it was any more than just another morbid joke. Seeing this, one of the other interns did a small throat laugh at it. The happy-go-lucky music plays as is normal, and the story begins with Squidward practicing his clarinet, hitting a few sour notes like normal. We hear SpongeBob outside laughing, and Squidward stops, yelling at him to keep it down as he has a concert that night and needs to practice. SpongeBob says okay and goes to see Sandy with Patrick. The bubble splash scene comes up and we see the ending of Squidward's concert. This is when things begin to seem a bit off. While playing, a few frames repeat themselves, but the sound doesn't. At this point, the sound is synced up with the animation, so yes, that's not common. But when he stops playing, the sound finishes as if the skip had never happened. There's a slight murmuring in the crowd before they then begin to boo him. Not normal cartoon booing that is common in the show, but you could very clearly hear malice in it. Squidward's in full frame and looks visibly afraid. The shot goes to the crowd, with SpongeBob in center frame. He too is booing, very much unlike him. That isn't the oddest thing, though. What is odd is that everyone had incredibly detailed, portrait-like eyes, clashing visibly with the simple cartoon style. It simply didn't fit or belong there. Cold and angry and full of detailed eyelashes and blood vessels. Illogical as it may be, something about the clashing of the styles was viscerally upsetting. Some of us watching the clip looked at each other, obviously confused, but since we weren't the writers, we didn't question its appeal to children quite yet. The shot goes to Squidward sitting on the edge of his bed, looking very forlorn. The view out of his porthole window is of the night sky, so it isn't very long after the concert. The unsettling part is that at this point, there's no sound. I mean literally no sound. Not even the feedback from the speakers in the room. It was as if they had been completely muted, including their soft electronic hum just from being on. For a brief moment I thought perhaps they had just been unplugged, but the glowing power button said otherwise. Anyways, he just sat there, blinking, in this absolute silence for about 30 seconds. Then, as quickly as the deafening silence had come, it was broken by his soft sobbing. He put his hands, or tentacles, over his eyes and cried quietly for a full minute or more. All the while, a faint background noise slowly began to grow. It sounded like a slight breeze through a forest. the screen slowly begins to zoom in on his face. By slow, I mean it is only noticeable if you look at shots 10 seconds apart side by side. His sobbing gets louder and more full of hurt and anger. The screen then twitches a bit, as if it twists in on itself for a split second, then back to normal. The wind through the trees sound gets slowly louder and more severe, as if a storm is brewing somewhere. The truly eerie part was Squidward's sobbing. It just sounded so real, as if the sound wasn't even coming from the speakers anymore, but as if it was somewhere in the room with us. And as nice and expensive sound equipment as studios have, I don't think there's any technology to really make it match that strange acoustic experience. I swear it sounded like he was there. I was starting to get really weirded out by this point and I wanted to leave, but everybody else kept watching, and at this point, I had to know what was going to happen next. So I stayed. Below the sound of the wind through the trees and the sobbing in that room, very faintly, something sounded like laughing. It came at odd intervals and never lasted more than a second, so you had a hard time pinning it. We watched the show twice, so pardon me if things sound too specific, but I've had a hard time thinking about them. After 30 seconds of this, the screen blurred and twitched violently, and something flashed over the screen, as if a single frame was replaced. The lead animator paused and rewound frame by frame. What we saw was horrible. It was a still photo of a dead child. He couldn't have been more than 6. His face was mangled and bloody. One eye dangling over his upturned face popped. He had been stripped down to his underwear, and his stomach was crudely cut open and his entrails lying beside him. He was laying on some sort of pavement that was probably a road. The most upsetting part was that there was a shadow of the photographer. There was no crime tape, no evidence tags or markers, and the angle was completely off for a shot designed to be evidence. It would seem the photographer was the person responsible for the child's death. We were, of course, mortified, but pressed on, hoping it was maybe just some part of a huge, sick joke. The screen flipped back to Squidward, still sobbing louder than before, and half-body in frame. There was now what appeared to be blood running down his face from his eyes. The blood was also done in a very realistic style, looking as if perhaps if you reached out to the screen, you might just be able to touch it with your own hands. The wind sound was now as if we were in a gale blowing through a forest. There were even snapping sounds of branches. The laughing, a deep baritone, lasting at longer intervals and coming more frequently. After about 20 seconds, the screen again twisted and showed another single-frame photo. The editor was reluctant to go back this time, as were all of us, but now we had begun to suspect that this was perhaps not a joke, but something that needed to be investigated. And we were already this far into it, and if we had to speak to the police, perhaps it would be best if we knew exactly what we were handing over to them. This time, the photo was that of what appeared to be a little girl, no older than the first child. She was laying on her stomach, her barrettes in a pool of blood next to her. Her left eye was also popped out, and she was also stripped down to her underpants. Her entrails were piled on top of her above another crude cut along her back. Again, the body was on a street, and the photographer's shadow was visible, very similar in size and shape to the first. I had to choke back vomit, and another intern ran from the room, unable to finish watching this clip. But for the rest of us, the show resumed. About 5 seconds after the second photo played, we returned to Squidward, who went silent, as did all the sound, once again, just like before. He put his tentacles down, and his eyes were now done in that same bizarre portrait-like style in the previous scene that had unsettled me so badly. like smooth oil paints refracting light and mimicking life so clearly. It simply didn't fit in a simple cartoon style like this. But suddenly, they were now bleeding, bloodshot and pulsating. He just stared at the screen as if staring directly into the viewer. After about 10 seconds, he started sobbing, this time not covering his eyes. The sound was piercing and loud, and most fear-inducing of all was his sobbing mixed with the screams. Tears and blood were dripping down his face at a heavy rate. The wind sound had come back, and so did the deep-voiced laughing, and this time the still photo lasted for a good 5 frames. I was having trouble processing this because whoever did this was sick and I didn't know if we were in danger, but I couldn't stop watching now. I had to know. Once again, the animator in the room with us rewinded and froze on the image. It was yet another boy, and the scene was worse. Not only could you see the photographer's shadow, but a large hand grasping and winding about the entrails. I began to feel myself losing control of my stomach, and the urge to vomit was unstoppable. Finally, I lost it and got sick all over the floor when they realized that the next 5 images were not 5 different images, but in fact a sequence playing out a small clip of a large hand squeezing the organs. I almost fainted when I saw that the child's eyes were not just open, but they blinked. He was still alive. At this point, we all needed a break. The lead sound editor told us to stop and collect ourselves, and that he was going to get the creator to see this. Mr. Hillenberg arrived within about 15 minutes. He was confused as to why he was even being called down there, so the editor just continued the episode rather than trying to verbalize all the madness we had just watched. Once the few frames were shown, all screaming, all sound stopped again, and we were back to that horrifying, suffocating, absolute silence. Squidward was just staring at the viewer, full frame of the face, for about 3 seconds. The shot quickly panned out, and that deep voice that had previously been laughing just said, "Do it." And we see Squidward's hands on a shotgun. He immediately puts the gun in his mouth and pulls the trigger. Realistic-looking blood and brain matter spatters the wall behind him, and he flies back with force. The last 5 seconds of the episode just show his body on the bed, on his side, one eye dangling on what's left of his head above the floor, staring blankly at it. Then, the episode ends. Mr. Hillenberg was obviously angry at this. He demanded to know what the hell was going on. Most people left the room at this point, so it was just a handful of us to watch it again. Viewing the episode twice only served to imprint the entirety of it in my mind and cause me horrible nightmares. I'm so sorry I stayed. The only theory we could think of was that the file was edited by someone in the chain from the drawing studio to here. Scared that there might be a truly dangerous person in building, the CTO was called in to analyze when it happened. The analysis of the file did show it was indeed edited over by new material. However, the timestamp was a mere 24 seconds before we began viewing it. All equipment involved was examined for foreign software and hardware, as well as possible glitches, as if the timestamp may have glitched and showed the wrong time. But everything all checked out fine. We don't know what happened, and to this day, nobody does. Of course the police investigated due to the nature of those photos, but nothing ever came of it. No child was identified and no clues were gathered from the data involved, nor physical clues in the photos. No one even knows how long ago they were taken. And then a short while after all of this was done. Suddenly, they didn't want me in their intern program anymore, and suddenly, the tape had vanished, and nobody was willing to even admit to its existence. I would love to think that perhaps it was maybe just a fever dream or something that never really happened at all. But I know something happened in that editing room. Something that I don't know how to prove, but I know it happened. And I think twice about things now.
Thanks for watching, and before you go, here's a special shout out to my patrons who donated $20 or more.
Jamie, Mortem Gutierrez, Jocelyn Cunningham, Arvok Levgry, Helen Imsland, Dark Nito Taki,
Kura,
Jesse,
and Simon Laverdier Delisle. Thanks so much, you guys. If you're interested in becoming a patron and helping me to keep YouTube creepy, please feel free to check out the link in the card.